So it's still setting up. Let's wait for the live to be set up.
I'm getting to my docs also, GDocs.
All right. So hopefully it is going live. I am just sharing the link with the rest of the people.
Okay.
And I muted my screen. Okay, so we are live now.
Okay,
let's get started. I think we will wait for people to join. So we did not give any notice. So this may be a surprise. Haven't been doing any videos for some time. Let's wait if a few people join. But anyway, I think the goal today is to talk about what is happening in the crypto world, overall in the economy. At Blockstart Ventures, I think a lot of people have not seen me here on Investing in the Difference. It's been a crazy year. I mean, I think when we say review of year end, it's not normal year. I mean, it was very, very unique. I think we failed to find any words. That's why I think everybody's calling it unprecedented. I think that's the only word which can describe what happened this year. So overall, I would say this is, I call it like, there was a crazy year from pandemic and all those. And in US, we had this whole election year, which also added to the craziness. Beyond that, I think if you are into this market, I think we saw a big crash, I think, which everybody was waiting for, but it didn't last with all the stimulus and the Fed action. So it was very, very eventful, at least we can say, if not anything else. And for us, like who have been tracking this crypto market, Bitcoin, it was even more eventful because Bitcoin went back into the bull mode. We got significant like bull market where we can say that we made like 4 times maybe. I think the lows of this year was 5K. But even if we go back to the start of the year, as we call it, year to date, we got almost 4x on Bitcoin. We saw some amazing new innovations in decentralized finance. We saw a lot of products coming out. Like I think we have been talking for years and years about what has been like, what is the future? What is the use of blockchain? While we have been tracking all the enterprise adoption on the finance side and the fintech world, I think that has made the most progress, which has always been the case. I think the biggest impact which cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin had was on finance. And what we are seeing right now is some amazing adoption. And when I say adoption, it's about like the DeFi, I would say. That is just changing the game on how like we are impacting the fintech. Now we can see the real world finance products on blockchain. The values are growing. Like it was earlier, it was just a concept. Now we are talking about hundreds of billions of dollars in the value locked in these financial products beyond just Bitcoin, but also like these lending options, yield generation, so many different things which happened. So it's crazy. I think the news, even if we want to talk about the news, if we want to talk about the events, this was a very, very eventful year. What do you say, Nico?
Absolutely eventful. I just, like you said, unprecedented. It's very difficult to think of a appropriate adjective. What's happening today is what we were waiting for in 2017. We mistimed it a little bit in the early days. You never know, but it's very clear that the institutional herd is here, the one that Mike Novogratz always talked about. So it's super exciting to see what's happening.
Yeah, and also I think when you say institutions, very important point. I think what we have seen now is not a matter of whether Bitcoin, it's about when for most of the institutions, because it's now almost everybody, like all the top institutions, and not just the institutions as if the people who are trying to make money off Bitcoin. We are talking about investors. We are talking about people like the funds who are allocating significant amount of money into Bitcoin as an asset. So if we see last few years, what we were mostly focusing on was how like brokerages, or because Bitcoin was a trend which everybody wanted to cash on. So there are a lot of like Bitcoin products where the people were just trying to make fee, which is obvious. I think any new asset class, you see a lot of people try to bring products which can help them earn additional margins and creating a new entity. What I'm referring to institutions this year it's very different. We're talking about Fortune 500 companies coming and investing in it. We're talking about companies like insurance products, like very, very old. Mass Mutual is an example, where they are like a 180-year-old insurance company with a very traditional, conventional outlook, and they're coming and saying they are allocating $100 million into as a asset allocation. uh, I think most of the biggest of the funds talking about Bitcoin replacing gold, and not only that, they're actually allocating uh, the funds as if they're allocating into a precious metal. So those are the kind of things I would say are more exciting. While we were waiting last year or 2 years back about BACT and so many different things we were hoping for, but the way it turned out has been surprising, because the adoption without any tools, without we are not even seeing those things. Like we are not seeing BACT having direct impact. I'm sure there is a lot of underground impact of these things, but all those things are automatically being hidden, which were actually hyped by the crypto people. But what we are seeing is a direct acceptance and money allocation, not just acceptance and saying yes Bitcoin, but they're actually putting money into it. That's very, very exciting.
Yeah, and we talk about what's left for Bitcoin. I mean, who needs to bless Bitcoin? And this was a recent conversation again from Mike Novogratz. I was listening to it. He said, I mean, do you need Ben Bernanke to bless it? I mean, you've got the biggest investors, the most famous, the most well-known investors at this point, Stanley Druckenmiller, people at Fidelity. You could go on and on. Guggenheim Investments, so many funds, so many institutional players, coming forward, and like you say, with investment, not just rhetoric. So
yeah, and my personal view is that most of these people, you talked about these big names. No, but like my experience with all these is they must be accumulating, and they don't come out before they buy. They usually come out and support it after they buy, because nobody wants to run up the thing by using their name. And so that is what I think is very different this year, because why we have seen the rally there means we can talk about many different reasons. Um, and then I think, as we talked in our webinar, so I don't know if a lot of people may not have watched that yet, but we did, at Blockstart Ventures, we have been running some webinars for our investors and potential investors. So we will post the link here on this YouTube as well. But basically, we have been talking about how the money flow is happening, like the kind of money printing, which is almost like in the year of pandemic, right from March to probably by next March, based on the trend and based on what we are already seeing from Congress in terms of approving the money. US will double its fiat reserves, or the available money, which we call it M1 money. That is doubling of available money in your, which can be spent, which is crazy, right? Means as I was telling some friends, and they were like, they told me, oh, this is very depressing to hear that if you did not double your cash balance in your account, that means you went down the rich list, if you believed that you were one of the well-to-do people. Because money is all relative. It's a matter of how much you own versus another, because intrinsically dollars or any fiat currency has no value. You can print as much as you want. And it's if we go by the basic principle of economics, it's about demand and supply. So if you have more money supply, the prices will go up at some point. The headline numbers of inflation, I don't think they do justice, because these are all managed by governments. Like they talk about this, what is the inflation index and all that. That doesn't show you the real value of money dropping, the dollar value dropping every day.
Ramon, you brought over the webinar, you brought up a fascinating point. At that time, we were discussing, the dollar debasement since, for over the last 70 years. And we understood that in that time, the dollar itself has lost, 98% of its value. But you followed up with another statistic that was really shocking to me. You recall about how much additional loss occurred just this year, since the beginning of the year?
Oh yeah, I think since March there is the available money supply in US alone. I'm not even referring to the money printed by all the other countries and Europe and Asian countries. We're talking about US creating 64% additional supply till November, by the way. And as we all know, we just got this new stimulus passed yesterday, and this will add. That's what I'm saying. It will almost double by the time we get over this pandemic. Within 1 year, maybe 12 months, I'm expecting the money supply to be double of what we were at the start of 2020. And I think that is amazing. Like in terms of if people who are holding cash, as we say, savings is a huge thing. A lot of people look at how much their savings are. Basically, what you're saying is if you didn't double your savings or your dollar balance in this year of pandemic, which is tough on many people, it's not. We should not forget this was not an easy year. A lot of people lost their jobs. A lot of people have lost their businesses. So it's not a matter like we are probably lucky ones who are able to work remotely. Like we are in kind of tech industry, we are able to maintain what we are doing. Many of us, but still a majority of population is forget about doubling their money. They are actually losing their savings because they are actually not able to keep their jobs or something. So this is a very again unprecedented year where people the inequality is going to grow. Just in the fiat world, we will see this going to be a very different world by the end of this pandemic.
In the meantime, simultaneously, you had the Bitcoin halving. So while the money supply has increased, the Bitcoin supply has been halved. So it's a double-edged in that sense, and all the more reason to look at some of these assets where in the old days we would have, gold would have been the place to go. But when some of these Paul Tudor Jones saying, if this was a, if these assets were horses, Bitcoin would be the fastest horse. So someone who predicted the great crisis, in '86 and on, to say something like that, it really inspiring for ordinary investors and even the institutional community to follow up.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a fair point because I don't think Bitcoin is anywhere close to getting accepted as gold in terms of asset allocation. But it was interesting in last few weeks, as we have seen, even somebody like BlackRock coming and saying, yes, we accept, like we think that Bitcoin will replace gold in future. But these are big statements. We're talking about trillions of dollars of funds which are allocated by these companies. And I have been reading all these reports from Forbes, from Fidelity, from Citibank, JP Morgan. I think JP Morgan is the one which has come out with actual numbers, which they are talking about $600 billion waiting to be invested into Bitcoin. So we don't again, let's keep moving on to other topics because it's a given thing now. Bitcoin is no longer a question as we started with it. Bitcoin is not whether it is an asset class you should invest in. It's a matter of how much now, how much institution will invest. Right now, as we discussed, most of these institutions don't even have the liquidity. These were numbers being thrown around that the GBTC, the grayscale, they are actually buying most of the mined Bitcoin. Like that's what everybody talks about. And then you have PayPal, these MicroStrategy and Square kind of companies, the insurance companies like Mass Mutual, and then JP Morgan Chase coming and saying $600 billion is waiting. Where is that supply going to come from? So I think, as we all know, Bitcoin is the only, perhaps one of the cryptos which is fixed in supply. A lot of others are either inflating or they don't have, like Ethereum. I don't even understand how they set the supplies because that keeps inflating.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of allocation, I think the price has to go up. There is no other way. And this is what we are seeing. In this year, we have seen it gone up by 4 times, but there's no limit. Means if we are talking about $600 billion. On the other hand, now as we don't want to keep impressing on the same point about Bitcoin. So let's move on to what else is happening. Like Bitcoin is successful. 2020 was a big year for Bitcoin, making all-time highs. It's now accepted. No more questions about it. But the biggest thing which for me for 2020 was the DeFi. This is like really democratizing how the lending, the like yield farming. Of course, whenever something starts, it starts with a Ponzi. We all know that. Like in 2013, probably everybody talked about Bitcoin being a Ponzi, and that's true actually. It means the way even fiat is a Ponzi means it's a matter of whether you believe in it or not. Bitcoin became a solid asset class now that everybody has accepted it. At the start, it was just a greater fool theory, which everybody talked about. That it's as they call it, funny money, right? So so the question is now DeFi. Now it is, yes, it can be considered Ponzi, and there are, as it happens, 90% of the people who 90% of the project will fail. But then again, we saw something like Yearn Finance, something like these Uniswap, Balancer. These are some really big value add projects in Ethereum world, and all of these are becoming like a real play for future, like synthetics. Like look at so many different things which are coming up right now. And I would go back to again the institutions who are looking at it. Like I was reading this Messari's crypto thesis, and they have put a big chapter on DeFi itself and how this is a game changer and how the big institutions are backing them. So that's what differentiates between early days of Bitcoin, where even though it was considered Ponzi, it was retail backed. What is happening in this 2020 year is all these new technologies, which would have been termed Ponzi in an alternate, like 5 years back, now they have got the support and belief from these big institutions. That gives it the validity, that gives it the legs to go and make a change in not just a theoretical and a MVP stage, but actually making those products happen. So that's, I think, is a big change in 2020 I would like to highlight.
Yeah, and just transitioning though from the conversation about Bitcoin, when you talk about PayPal with 350 million users, Facebook says that by next month they could launch Diem, the token, to its 2.5 billion users. And these assets, even Bitcoin, you talk about BlackRock and $8 to $10 trillion under management. You have the growing awareness to transition from the Bitcoin discussion into DeFi and other topics. Just the fact that people are talking about it, whether it's Bitcoin, whether it's Diem, whether it's PayPal, Elon Musk, the discussion from the other day, the conversation is everywhere. It's been infiltrated all discussions and industries. So it's interesting to note that in any industry, the conversation is about blockchain. You've seen this as part of Web3 with AI and machine learning. So, how it's going to impact, we don't know. We know it is impacting. And so carrying on with the discussion now into DeFi and others.
Yeah, I think that's a valid point. Like it's now everywhere. Like the discussion is everywhere. But again, let me say, a lot of people still believe, they don't understand new things, and that's what happened for DeFi. Means, of course, there was kind of a bubble in summer of 2020 for where some of these projects got maybe unwarranted attention, but that is maybe also a factor of more content available, more, I think, information flow coming in. And again, I will keep highlighting these support from big institutions, which is making sure that this whatever is the findings are being shared with the bigger investor class. And I think the money is moving much faster. I think the innovation cycles are shortening. We are seeing new projects launching in months, like in a 1 month time, 2 months time, completely changing the landscape. So as an investor or as somebody who is looking for benefiting from it, you need to be on the toes. You cannot be just those days are gone in this world where you say invest and forget. Like Bitcoin was that asset, and perhaps Bitcoin will remain that asset where you just buy and forget. But for most of the other more active classes, when we talk about DeFi, when we talk about some of these more advanced projects which need a lot more sophisticated understanding, and perhaps that's what is also a factor where some people missed out, because people are still trying to understand these concepts, and they are not easy. Trust me, like when I look at every new project every week or every month, they are becoming more and more complex. And the reason being, they are adopting the conventional finance world instruments and they are bringing them on blockchain. And as all of us know, and I think we have experienced in 2008 how complex things can get in the real finance world. So there are ups and downs of this. Means the idea is that we are already living those complex products in conventional world, and it's a matter of now translating them onto blockchain and how you bring the same benefit. And what is the biggest benefit? I think that was the dream everybody was after. That is to cut the middleman from this, to make it a kind of a peer-to-peer regime where you are setting the rules, algorithms are trading. And I think that's what DeFi is bringing. And it's interesting like how things have changed in last 6 to 8 months. Even if we are reviewing 2020, but actually these things started happening around early summer or maybe late spring this year. And it looks like everything changed after that. Means the way like stable coins, the amount of money which was there in stable coins has grown by maybe 4 or 5 times. We have maybe 5 different stable coins, and with the invention of Curve and many of these new liquidity pools, we don't have any lack of liquidity. It's no longer a problem where you are launching a new coin or you are creating a new instrument which is valuable, you are struggling for liquidity. All those things are becoming the new innovation which happened in 2020 is changing that. You don't need to raise money with ICOs. You can actually go and kind of crowdsource in a different way, which is we call it liquidity mining. We call it like a lot of different ways. I think it's again very tricky, means how this will evolve from a regulatory perspective. But at this moment, it's I think the innovation is running too fast for even regulators to think about how to make sense of it.
Oh, that's right, Ramon. It's a very good point. And when you think about regulation, one thing that's been fascinating as an attorney looking at this is how quickly, these regulated exchanges like Coinbase, Gemini, have onboarded these products that, in many ways remain in kind of regulatory uncertainty. We can go into some of the, the details on that, but there seems to be an acceleration. And by the way, we saw this crash, in 2017. Many of us that were in the markets already by then. It was elusive because yes, there was a drop in price, but as you just mentioned, building just kept accelerating, and some of the products that we're experiencing today were kind of built on the back of this, crash that many had written off cryptocurrency. Just like, I keep going back to this, and even spoke about it last time during the webinar. This parallel between the internet, when you had, some of the smartest people at the time saying that, the impact of the internet on business will be no greater than the fax machine. At the time, to think about that, the internet itself having as much impact on business as the fax machine, it's unfathomable today. But some of the same discussions, some of the same fears, some of the same anxieties about what this is, with anytime we don't understand something, we tend to avoid it. But that would have been a mistake. On the other hand, coming back to the regulatory discussion, this whole the ICO boom and the impact from the regulatory perspective with the SEC talking about unregulated securities, and the fear of listing these assets. Remember, it took a long time for Coinbase to list another token besides Ethereum, right, and so many other exchanges as well. And now, for many, DeFi has been around for a while, but for many it's new. So by comparison now, to the 2017 and before, how quickly these exchanges that are regulated, that are, their selling point is compliance, that they've so quickly onboarded these instruments, and you can see it's a different world, and it's evolving exponentially.
I think that's a fair point, Nico. And by the way, if many of you who don't know Nico, let me introduce him again, because now we see that quite a few people are watching live right now on YouTube. So he's an attorney by profession, and he's my partner on Blockstart Ventures. And he's like the greatest value add from in this space, because when we are looking at Web3, blockchain, and so on, regulations become like as important as technology innovation because of so much uncertainty. And as Nico pointed out, we were watching at Blockstart Ventures in surprise every day when we were seeing this, how fast some of these new innovations in DeFi world are getting accepted by exchanges. Like Coinbase, which was one of the toughest listing in US. We are seeing now that Wi-Fi, synthetics, all these really innovative products which have been which are fairly new. Like there's not enough analysis done from a regulation perspective. I think it's interesting that we are talking today when this headline news is all about Ripple and XRP, where SEC is going after them. Now, how old is Ripple? Regulators are still catching up on prosecuting Ripple for their money raise, which is means I don't even know. I was not even doing this much of blockchain and crypto in those days when Ripple was launched. So it's even outdates me, and regulators are catching that right now. How will they ever even follow up on the innovation which is running? So this is where I think it's very interesting, and I would love to hear your views on this, Nico. Like, how do you compare like something like Ripple, which is under trouble right now, with the today's generation, like in terms of regulations, and how from Blockstart Ventures you think we are in a position to make the difference between these two types of asset classes?
It's very interesting, especially Ripple, because they actually sought to comply. They sought they, as far as I know, and I've, forgive me, I haven't done that much research on it. I've followed Ripple over the years, but this is a company that, that seemed to go along a compliance route. They, as far as I understand, they had reached out to the SEC and sought some clarity, some regulatory clarity. And it's very interesting because the policy of the SEC fundamentally is to protect investors. So waiting, these years, 7 years or however long it's been, to make a statement on it, usually if you commit a crime or say something that's against the law, you would be notified. I mean, there's no question that, notice was had by the SEC. I mean, this has been a top 10 crypto for years. So, I mean, you can't say that they weren't noticed. So if they're noticed, why wait so long? And if the interest and the policy of the SEC is to protect the investor, when an action comes, who's hurt is the investor, right? Fundamentally, the investor's hurt. So there's a lot of questions in this respect. I know that the SEC brings up this idea of informational asymmetry, which is another, they want to protect the investor, right? Since the Investment Act in the 40s, by the way, the regulation that is applying to cryptocurrency today is, 100 years old. That's something else to keep in mind. How do you regulate these assets, in a system that at the time it was created could not be contemplated,
And
so
also, and also I think it's a matter of technology is getting confident now. Like, as I gave the example even in our last webinar, where we talked about how Uber and these Lyft kind of ride sharing companies, they took on the regulators, and regulators had to back down at some point if you innovate fast enough and the adoption is fast enough. While I'm sure SEC will make example of some of these, like as they are doing with Ripple. Even I think we all are from EOS community. We saw how even EOS was fined, Block 1 was fined for their ERC20 raise. But that was still a pretty small fine with respect to what SEC charged them for. On the other hand, Ripple is right now, I'm sure they will come out with a similar kind of fines or something. But on the other hand, what I'm trying to highlight is innovators like Coinbase listing all these DeFi instruments and everybody coming together now. And even some of these Congress men and women, they are raising their voice against all these harsh regulations which are being put in place. I think we are at a point probably where in the future, I foresee the Uber model where cities will back down and saying, okay, we will adjust to the innovation rather than trying to kill the innovation. Like, that's because its adoption is moving so fast. And we have seen time and time again that regulators cannot keep regulating because, first of all, they cannot catch up. That is, the innovation is so fast. Second is, as you said, their intent is not to harm the investors. Of course, they will make examples of some people to create the fear of, they don't want lawlessness. They don't want, for good reasons. And as I keep saying, is I'm not one of those who will say there's no role for these regulatory bodies, because there are a lot of scams out there. There are a lot of malicious activity, which always is there whenever there is a hype. But on the other hand, I would say that this definitely looks like that the technology world and the innovators are moving much faster. And what we saw in 2020 is that they're getting confident with all these new DeFi listings. Even VCs, like if we remember, like 2017, VCs would be very careful touching these products, like ICOs, and so they will have to worry about all the legal implication. But in DeFi world, we are seeing, including I think Blockstart Ventures, we are ourselves very, very involved in this DeFi. And we are seeing that it's becoming like now you cannot stop it. You just, there are so many investors, there are so many structured institutions who are involved that I don't think this is a considered risk. But I would be, of course, regulators have a way to surprise us, just like they did with the Ripple. And it will be interesting how this plays out. And we are keeping our eyes on it. And as Nico said, like, I think that's a balance we need to strike in innovation and from a regulatory perspective, what it means.
It's interesting too that, I'm sorry, go ahead, Ramon.
No, go ahead. Sorry. I was just about to make a point about a lot of people are watching on YouTube because I posted this on our Investing with a Difference group. So please feel free to ask questions on your chat if you have any. We would like to make it interactive, and we will try to take as many questions as we can.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Ramon, touching on the last conversation, it's very interesting watching this, the macro play out on the regulatory front. In the micro, it's very similar to what we go through in the fund, and even personally discussing, some of the many projects that you've built and worked through, and the push of the push of innovation, that hits the regulation. So there's always a balance. We have to have regulation for this to flourish, not only domestically but globally. And that's another thing. It's a global movement. A lot of the tech movement in the early 2000s, like late 90s, 2000s, was mostly domestic, and but now, and technology is obviously spread globally, but this movement, this blockchain movement, is very much a global movement. So when you talk about regulation, you have to consider how that regulation affects innovation, and how innovation can stifle the progress of a nation. Finally, we can't let, at least speaking from a US perspective, it's you don't want to stifle innovation by over regulating. And so it's very important to consider that in balance. So I know that's a very difficult job for the SEC and the CFTC also for commodities. Very, very difficult. It's challenging.
I think it's
Where do you start, and how do you approach? And in the meantime, it's moving very fast.
Yeah, and I think beyond that, it's as we have been analyzing, I think there's a lot of interesting discussions we had recently about this DeFi projects, which is it's almost impossible to even define. Like I remember this a few comments from some of these CFTC chairmen, for example, and from OCC. I think from like many of these people are already talking. These are people who are actually part of the regulatory teams in a various capacities, and as we keep reviewing their comments, it's becoming very clear that at this moment regulators don't even know, like in a DeFi world where there is no money raised, there is no kind of tokens sold. It's for example, when you are mining a governance token, or for example, when the actual users who are using the platform are the ones who are earning the token in some form or other, who are you going to even prosecute in this scenario, or who are you going to even give a notice to? Secondly, like what we have seen in the decentralized communities, where they are not run by a single company or by a single entity, how are, like, they don't have any mechanism today, no laws are in place to even go and define where somebody has broken a law. So I think this is where the innovation is gone beyond what it was, right? And the Bitcoin was the same thing. Like Bitcoin came in, as we keep going back to Bitcoin because that was the start of everything, and that's where like we have very clear acceptance that Bitcoin is not going to be regulated ever, and it's now being accepted as an asset class. Ethereum got a very clear waiver from SEC with a good report saying yes, it is not a security. So I think it's a matter of progress in regulation side also over the years, and these comments which are coming, as I keep highlighting, from CFTC, OCC, and even SEC commissioner, like some of the commissioners who are, like, for example, Commissioner Pierce, she has been very, very vocal about how these things are like moving the needle on the innovation, and she's very supportive of even something like DeFi. So I think that is what gives me some confidence that probably we have passed the point where these things will not matter. And I think just to keep it light also, let's keep moving on, not worrying about the seriousness of what happened with Ripple and the regulatory stuff. Let's talk about what are the opportunities in front, right? What are the other things which are happening? And I keep going back to the biggest thing in DeFi, why DeFi was as successful as ever. I would say stablecoins, because I am a great fan of stable coins, and we don't talk enough about them because they're not speculative. People do not go and invest in them for doubling their money, but the algo based coins and the regulated stable coins like USDC and GUSD and those kind of things, they're both interesting. They're like an amazing array of products. They're serving this purpose, where when we look at how you can generate yield on it, like at Blockstart Ventures, we have been very actively studying these things on how you can, like in a today's world when the interest rates are zero almost across the world, where when you are holding US dollar in your bank account with almost no interest on it, while in Europe a lot of people are paying interest, or actually there's a negative interest, not at the retail level but at the enterprise level, or I don't know, as a big funds or companies, they are paying actually interest for keeping their money in the bank. This is where I think right now when we look at stable coins, I'm sure most of the people know, or if some people who don't know, like you need to understand that these stable coins are able to generate 10% to 12% APR by just lending it without taking any risks. And of course, nothing is risk free. So I would not recommend you just blindly putting into any of these institutions. We do like when we say Blockstart Ventures as a venture fund, when we say without risk, we are talking about how we reduce risk when we look at each of these entities, when we work with them, and so on. But it's fairly low risk as compared to probably even speculating on things and investing into asset classes which are volatile.
Yeah, there's, I mean, risk can come in so many ways. We've touched on, regulation. Obviously, there's technological risk. There's there are many risks, obviously, and I mean that's one of my favorite parts of the area is that it's emerging, and it has it can affect the entire world and each industry. Whether from the legal perspective, politics, economy. It's just amazing, the impact. And just as an aside, also interesting to me personally is the fact that necessity creates these innovations. I mean, going back to the Great Depression, where a lot of the regulation that we're experiencing now in securities and commodities comes out of the Great Depression. But the Great Depression gave us the light bulb and other amazing innovations. In 2008 and 9, when Bitcoin was born, it was out of necessity. We're in the middle of a great recession, and DeFi is coming out of other necessities. For example, how do you approach regulation? As a technologist, how do you approach some of these issues? And DeFi is another very ingenious approach. And very quickly you realize that the community that we're a part of are some of the most creative, astonishing innovators anywhere in the world. It's really fascinating to take note of.
Oh yeah, I think I'm like really amazed. We are, as I think many of people who are watching here know, that we are actively building, not just investing as Blockstart Ventures, but Blockstart, and we have many different entities. I think many people in the community know about what we are doing in products. Like we have done DApp account, we have done Blockument, we have done a lot of new products in the blockchain space, working with enterprise very, very closely, finding solutions using blockchain technologies. But while we are building, we also see that what others are doing, and we are very closely monitoring. And I think DeFi changed everything. In my personal view, it is a giant leap. It's almost as big as the innovation of Bitcoin, when Bitcoin came into existence. So because this is Bitcoin is a great store of value, and it's, as everybody's now accepted it, it's more moving into the digital gold narrative. It's no longer a currency. It's no longer seen as a viable like fintech instrument, other than store of value, and probably a much better store of value because it's easier to build tools around. It can be, what we have seen in the recent days with the kind of synthetic Bitcoin on Ethereum and many other places, that you can carry it around easily, and you can build programmable logic around it. So that's definitely a great value add. But beyond that, what is happening right now in a DeFi world is you're talking about lending. You're talking about pooling resources and investing into strategies together. Even some very exciting ideas where there are decentralized hedge funds being created. And it's like amazing how fast this innovation is happening, and how the barriers are being broken, where the things which were not like, which took 10 years or 20 years to get a regulation passed, these DeFi instruments are saying, go and try to catch us. Like we are building these without any regulation, with the intent of providing everybody, as in a democratic way, anybody can participate in these instruments as long as you understand them. And I think the challenge I see in what that is creating is the regulations were there for good reason. They were there to protect an innocent investor who doesn't understand these things, and that is in fact true even now. Like when you look at these DeFi instruments, I'm sure a lot of people don't understand what's going on when you talk about synthetics, when you talk about I'm not even going to even more complicated ones. I mean, even I remember talking to a few people who took a long time understanding a basic thing as Uniswap or AMMs, like automated market makers. It's not easy to keep absorbing so much of innovation, and I think that's where I don't know if the the fact that there is no regulation right now on these products, is it a good thing or a bad thing? And as a venture fund, we are always worried, because I think when we talk to the investors and the potential investors, they keep coming to us and saying, okay, they don't, that sometimes they come to us because they don't understand this, they don't have either bandwidth, or they're not as active in investigating. And I think that's where we see the need which we can fulfill, and that's what we are trying to do for investors. But on the other hand, it's scary that while these opportunities now exist in a democratic fashion, that everybody can invest into these, but the lack of information can still lead to the same situation where people get scammed, and then regulators have to go and come heavy-handed to protect the investors. So I think it's going to be interesting how these things evolve. While I think as innovators, we always love that DeFi is breaking the barriers of regulation. But as a fund manager, and when I talk about my history of working with investors, I also worry sometimes that probably this is not going to be easy for an average investor to follow, because every day you have to be really, really active in monitoring and tracking the technology advancement risks. And even like we have seen, I think there's a lot of news again when we're talking about looking back at 2020. We have seen the full circle in DeFi. We saw innovation, a lot of money going in, people making a lot of money, and then we saw those hacks. We have seen like millions and millions of dollars which were lost. So we have seen all of these things in a very short time. And we need to always remember that, of course, as sometimes we forget that this is easy for us sometimes, when as a venture fund or as a team which is very heavily involved in this space, to be able to watch it and understand it. But an average investor can get very, very confused with the risks versus reward ratio, and they may chase the wrong projects and the wrong allocations in their portfolio. And I think that's what worries me. And I think I'm still not 100% sure personally whether not having regulation is a great thing, or is it it's not a great thing.
Yeah, it's very challenging, and from a legal perspective, it's not that there's no regulation, because we understand what this, like the SEC defines as a security. They very clearly define that. But the question is, how does that align with these very modern products? It's very difficult. So, a lot of lawyers, including myself, struggle, and we tear apart every last letter of the law to try to understand what the intent is, and then how our innovations either align or contradict the intent. So obviously we want to comply. That's very as important as innovation, at least from my side, is compliance. We want to comply. How do we comply though if the law is not conducive to application to these products? That also segues into a question from Johnny, I think, who asked, what's the benefit for EOS? I guess he's saying is for not being a security. I think so. What's the benefit for EOS not being a security?
Oh yes,
Well,
I see that question. So how would you take it, Nico? Like I think it's a very interesting question, because we are all coming from EOS community. We have spent, like, even we are building in EOS. We have been in EOS for a long time. So when SEC went and said like they let go of block 1 for raising money, that was more for ERC20, right? That has nothing to do with EOS mainnet. And EOS mainnet has never been questioned till now, because there is no entity. Like there's no entity which SEC can serve notice to, because they are this organic block producers who came across, who started the mainnet. So legally speaking, I think they did a very good job. I think block 1 did a very good job to isolate themselves from the mainnet token. And now that they have a lot of money, I'm assuming that they have a good set of lawyers who are keeping them protected. So what is your view, Nico? Like as a lawyer, what do you see? Like, how do you see EOS, the way it was planned and the way it exists today? What do you think about it?
Well, interestingly, at the time, I was very much focused. I was following the other tokens, but primarily from an investment perspective, it was Bitcoin and Ethereum, and I couldn't find much interest in many of these other projects. What initially attracted me to EOS was their offering, and looking at the way it was put together. I mean, from a legal perspective, it was brilliant. And watching a lot of the commentary around the offering, it was pretty clear that people didn't understand, what it was trying to get across. For example, you're looking at the offering, the ICO documents. It says this will have no value and all these other things. They're just going down the list of elements that form a security, and they're basically making an offering to the public saying why it's not a security. Once you understand that, it makes a lot more sense, the offering. But how expertly it was crafted make me realize that these people are doing their diligence. They understand compliance. They obviously understand the tech, with Dan Larimer being there since very inception. In fact, if you go back in the record, he actually was conversing, one of the few people in the space that actually conversed with Satoshi at the time, asked questions and was there the whole time. But just to answer the question, the benefit is once you've been classified as a security, you need to register with the SEC. And if you don't register with the SEC or find an exemption to registration, then you may have an action against you. So you obviously want to be in compliance. So either register, find an exemption to registration, or as in the case of Block One EOS, they got a no action letter, which is also good. So you want regulatory clarity. The main thing is regulatory clarity. Once you have that, you're on solid footing to continue innovating and doing your thing. And that's what XRP is looking for right now.
Yeah, I think, and to add to that, what Nico said, right? My view is because they went through this whole SEC process and getting the no action letter for their money raise, US mainnet was never questioned. The reason is, who will you go after? Like, if you are SEC, will you go after the top 21 block producers? Because Block One is not saying that they launched US mainnet. They are not saying that they are running it. And now that they are feeling comfortable that their stake is such a small amount, and even if they vote, they cannot choose any block producer themselves. So they have enough legal reasoning around saying that they have nothing to do with running mainnet. So definitely that gives protection to EOS and projects. But while I can see that Ripple there was always a company which was owning it up and trying to go the regulatory route. So from that perspective, I would say the implication and the benefit for EOS is that there's no action being taken, or there's no entity to go after for SEC at this moment, because they already did their action against Block One. They fined them for whatever settlement they reached. And anyway, that was never against EOS mainnet. That was always about their ERC20 money raise. And Block One has participated in promoting EOS mainnet, which is actually a lot of us as the EOS community, we are unhappy about. But on the other hand, that saves you from what happened with Ripple just now. If Block One had owned it as that they are running this mainnet, and they, as a company, they are running it, then they have to get registered as a security. And that's what SEC is telling Ripple, that this is a given case of security. And I would say that we are seeing the benefit currently in last 24 hours, ever since the news flow has started on Ripple, that why it was the better way, like what EOS did. So I think.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Ramon.
No, I'm fine. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that the types of mistakes that they made, if you look at some of the initial news from from the Ripple case, the fact that they're basically saying, invest in this, you're going to gain value. It's a speculative asset. Talking about increasing value, that's one of the main elements, of a security, that, the efforts of this group will take your investment and make it worth more. That's something that you never saw, the type of mistake that you never saw in the EOS community from the developers and the team, executive team. A lot, very, very simple errors, I think, and not understanding the path of regulation can maybe trigger the action. If you look at EOS offering, very clear disclosures when you hear in the XRP case talking about informational asymmetry. They're saying that the investor who's ostensibly in a weaker position than the people who are offering the security or the instrument, whatever it is, if it's not a security, don't have as much information as the investor. So they've got all the information, they're holding the asset, they can take advantage of the investor. Again, I have to question, when all these years pass, value is accruing, and then the SEC attacks or issues an action. And so it threatens the very investors they seek to protect. I understand there's a lot more behind this, so I won't make a judgment. I just think, it opens a lot of questions as to timing.
And I think most of the people who are watching there on YouTube, I think they are coming from EOS community. So just to add to that point on EOS, as the venture fund, like at Blockstart Ventures, we are comfortable with EOS as a legal position, and we like what they have done. As a technology, we are very excited about it and have been always excited. We have been developing on it personally as a team. Like we have other entities which we are working on, and we have been working on EOS. And you can see even DeFi, like we talked about DeFi all this through this video today and this webinar. But remember, like if you compare what is happening in Ethereum, like nobody can make, like if you are investing $5,000 or $2,000, which is still not a small sum, you cannot make any transaction on Ethereum. In the peak summer of DeFi this year, the transaction fee of a curve or a Yearn Finance or anything was anywhere between $25 to $50 per transaction. So even if you're making a 10% yield, that is of no value, because you will end up losing that in just depositing and withdrawing from the DeFi project. While on the other hand, what we have seen as the way DeFi is growing on EOS, we can see that transactions are still free, and with all the issues we still observe with congestion sometimes, but still you are, like as a user, I have been doing millions of transactions in last few years on EOS, means personally, and as a company, and the products we are building, we have done millions and millions of transactions for very limited cost. So this is still relevant irrespective of all the innovation happening in Ethereum, because I think EOS is still a very, very relevant technology. It is safer from a regulatory perspective with what we just discussed. What is missing is liquidity. What is missing is it's always challenging in a decentralized world. Means EOS went the right way of letting the block producers run it, letting the community run it, and we can see the challenges. And there are a lot of issues when you don't have promoters. Like what Ethereum has is these venture funds and these big marketing arms of these venture firms who are going and taking it forward. But also you need to understand that these are like maybe a few hundred people who have the money, who are building and who are enjoying the benefit of the DeFi. Because unless you're putting $100,000, you cannot make profits in Ethereum DeFi. Because most of the times you end up losing a lot on the gas fee, and you're not able to match up to the yields of the big players in the game. So I think this is where I think it's still I would say MVP, whatever Ethereum is building, it's still a very early stage of DeFi. There's a long way to go to bring it to end users. We just talked about all this while about Bitcoin. This, after so many years, this is the year when I think more and more people, we can say, are participating in Bitcoin. Even those who are not directly investing, their funds will invest. Their like mutual funds will soon own Bitcoin. Their insurance products will own Bitcoin. So we are seeing those things are happening. So from that perspective, we are reaching the kind of adoption today and like in 2020 on Bitcoin, which is 12 years after its creation. So DeFi, whether it we can be disappointed or we don't know, we can question whether EOS is relevant or Ethereum is DeFi will continue to gain acceptance. My view is that nobody knows, because this is very, very early stage. Maybe DeFi does not have more than a few thousand in best case. I think it may be a few hundred relevant investors, but it may not have more than a few thousand people who are actually making use of it today, because that's how these things are built. But on the other hand, when you look at the products on EOS, while the liquidity is low, while the values are pretty low, and that's what you are, it's not grown yet. but I see almost same number or maybe more number of users, and that's a benefit. I think it's a matter of, can we bring liquidity? And recently, I think we have seen a lot of comments from Brendan Bloomer and Block One in general. They are actually talking numbers. Like the last tweet from Brandon Bloomer was about referring to his own 144k Bitcoin liquidity, and the tweet talked about how much more they have in the meantime. Not just that 144k, they are bringing investors, and we are studying that. We are seeing that there is definitely a lot of hope. But based on the history with Block One, I think again, I always say that we should not be dependent on them for good reasons, because it's a decentralized community. Nobody was waiting for one entity in Bitcoin world to to take Bitcoin forward. It was the community. Same thing for Ethereum. There was not a single entity. Of course, consensus helped a lot, but the developers came together. They built. That's what we need right now. I think EOS will not be successful irrespective of what Block One does, irrespective of whether SEC doesn't go after it. It's a matter of how many developers are working on it. What is the community's participation? And I think that's what we are watching very carefully. As a venture fund, we have a duty towards our investors to make sure that we are not overcommitting. On the other hand, technology wise, we don't like anything better than EOS. In terms of adoption, in terms of the success of it financially, we are still watching, and we have not given up, but we are watching very carefully on where it is heading. So if that was the question, I think that's what I would like to answer. So I think we are kind of at the end of the hour where we were planning, but we still are available for some more time. If you have any questions, I see that quite a few people are watching right now on our YouTube channel at Investing with a Difference. Again, this is just to give people who joined late. So Blockstart Ventures, we are a venture fund for accredited investors, and we have been working in the space of blockchain for some time now. And at this moment, I think my partner Nico is there with me. Our goal in this video was to review what happened in 2020, what is our outlook on in coming years. And right now, I think it's a matter of, of course, as many of you know me as Investing with a Difference, I'm ready to take any questions. But so anything, if you want to ask, we can stick around and we can try to answer some of these questions. I see another comment from Johnny saying thoughts on Profi. That's interesting, actually. Of course, nobody knows until they disclose. I think Brandon Bloomer talks about this Profi. What my understanding is, this is kind of a compliant on-chain DeFi, you can call it. I think what he's trying to say is, can we make DeFi compliant? And as we have seen, that's a theme. We discussed this a little while back. Block One has been always been very careful in the way they don't build products which they can get into trouble with obvious law. And of course, it's a gray area. I think all of us, like, we also do the same thing as Blockstart Ventures. And that's what I think, that's why Nico, who is here as my partner, he's like very, very actively reviewing everything, and his focus is compliance. I think we love what Block One does as a company. If I were the shareholder of Block One, I would love the way they handle everything, because they first look at compliance. So when they say Profi, and the way Brandon has explained, I think it's a matter of how you are going to make sure that you're not breaking obvious laws while using the innovation of DeFi and bring it to more people. So that's my understanding of Profi. Again, I don't have any additional information than all of you on what that would look like. But it's encouraging when they talk about liquidity. As I said, the biggest thing missing in EOS right now is liquidity. Innovation is happening very fast. I don't see that there's any lack of innovation. You must have seen a lot of DeFi products in EOS in last 6 months. We are building. We are seeing a lot of other players are building right now in this space. So from that perspective, I think it's all a matter of liquidity and whether we can make sense of this. And how we can bring more users, and we can showcase that this is something which can grow. And again, let me highlight one more thing. Many of these so-called Ethereum projects, which were, Ethereum takes a lot of pride in being decentralized. I I think many of these DeFi projects were completely centralized. Why they were successful? Because of the money, because of the backing of a certain liquidity providers, and that's what DeFi cares for. So if Block One can bring the liquidity, anything can happen. And as we all know, the technology is not lacking, and it's very good. And the question of centralized versus decentralized doesn't exist anymore, in my eyes, because if it was centralized, it was very easy to attack EOS right now, as SEC or anybody can come after it, and we are fairly comfortable with where EOS stands today. So, but again, as a fund management role I'm playing, not as a technology person, I would say we have to wait and watch how this evolves. At this moment, we still lack liquidity in EOS, and that's the biggest missing part.
Yeah, I was just looking back at an earlier question, excuse me, from Ola Art. And I guess the question is there, if EOS got the okay, I guess you mean from the SEC, then does the Ethereum community need it as well? Absolutely. Any blockchain, any group that seeks investment, especially at scale, like these projects definitely need okay from SEC. Unless I misunderstood the question, please restate if I have. There's some other development questions, Ramon.
All right, so let me try to take those questions. So it says, where's the nice source debugger for EOS? How can you have mass adoption without comparable tools? I think yes. So that is definitely a place where EOS can improve. Unfortunately, again, we had a few companies building it, like EOS Studio and those kind of things, which were very good tools, which did not last long because of lack of investments from into those products. So yes, I think it's not easy when you're building a new ecosystem, and when you don't have that kind of support from in terms of the money. And that is a lost opportunity. I would keep saying, like, at personal level, I always question like where Block One could have made a difference as a company who developed the code to provide better support to these infrastructure providers in community, like community tools, and improve that. Having said that, things are changing now. Like if you see the kind of courses which are coming up from Block One, and I think they are also learning as a source provider. Ultimately, EOS.io is still completely centralized in terms of the development of the source code, which is Block One. So there's a difference between source code development and the blockchain which is running. So Block One completely owns EOS.io. They are promoting it. They are legally owning that source code without any hesitation. And from that perspective, I think they are learning the kind of courses they have put up. I'm hoping that this kind of feedback should go to them, and they are listening now. I have been talking to many of their different teams recently, and they are very, very open in terms of what community needs and how to take EOS.io forward. And I'm very hopeful that these things will change. Let's take other questions. When Block One wallet? Okay, I think this was more of a comment and sarcastic remark, I'm assuming, if you guys know the history of it. But yes, I think Block One has done very good with their tools, and the wallets are amazing now. Like if you look at Anchor Wallet, is making a lot of progress. And I think I don't see any concern. Even we have built DApp account, which is, I don't know if many of you have seen that. You should check it out. We are trying to make it easy for people to access EOS accounts or integrate dApps, and a lot of things are happening in this space which can make it easy onboarding. And but I think that is not the blocking point right now. Means we still have millions of EOS accounts. If we can bring liquidity, if we can bring the real quality application, it will not stop that from being successful. Let's talk about other questions. The problem with DeFi ecosystem is that there's too many DeFi platforms inflating that ecosystem with useless projects. Yes, so I think this we talked about, right? The fact is that there are a lot of, whenever there's a hype, there is always a lot of projects. There are always a lot of people like copycats, and there are a lot of people who are opportunistic. They automatically get filtered out, I think. It's very difficult for us to say that yes, that there is no quality. Like there's at least 10% of these projects are very, very high quality. they are delivering some really innovative products. And that's the matter. I think that's why you need that sophistication as an investor, as a participant in this, either as a technology player or as a investor. Both sides, I think you need a lot of sophistication here. And that is where I think we are trying to play a role. Means we are, and that's what I think our investors value when we talk about Blockstart Ventures. I think it's always like that is the same thing which happened in ICO days. If you remember, like 2017, 18, there was a lot of projects which were really bad. While we did see quite a few projects which are still around and in top 20, 30 projects today, which were started in that crazy ICO period. So, and that is true for any industry. Even in stock market, you will see like whenever there is a bubble, like 98%, 99% of the internet companies failed from the dot-com boom. So it's not unique to crypto. It's not unique to DeFi. It's a trend which it happens everywhere. People are opportunistic, and sometimes it's not even like maybe the intention is always good. Even those people want to be successful, they're building something important, but not everybody is successful. And the projects which are not successful, investors feel that they are not quality projects, while no team starts with the intention of failing. Yes, there will be some people who will be Ponzi's, who will be looking for taking advantage, and that is true in any market, as I said. So I think that I hope that answers your question on why so many DeFi platforms. I think, yeah, if there are copycats, probably no. But if somebody is trying to add new value or trying to create something new, I would say just you have to watch out. Like that's why you have to be active in DeFi world. You cannot just be like Bitcoin, where you said invest and forget, and you come back after a few years and see your value grow. You have to watch these platforms very carefully. These are not to be taken as passive investments. And this active management approach, this is why I think the role of institutional funding is going to keep growing, the institutional management. And this is one of the reasons I would say, like, we started Blockstart Ventures when we were looking at mostly enterprise blockchain like kind of investments. But 2020 has changed that, because we think that we cannot ignore fintech, we cannot ignore the DeFi. And we have added this as a major vertical for Blockstart Ventures to invest as well as develop into this space. And we believe that this can create a difference for our investors as well as for the community in general, where we can create more education, we can create better kind of better ways of investing into these DeFi trends. I think that's our goal.
It's also very interesting that, I mean, how different groups of investors, even individuals, funds approach investment. And when you say you have to be active when relating to DeFi, it's interesting how we as a fund approach this. I mean, we're building the technology, we're deep in the regulation, this really holistic approach of understanding the level of understanding one gains about the technology, building it from the ground up, is very unique. In the same way, as an attorney looking at regulation of these instruments in the larger picture of regulation of investment contracts as a whole, brings a very unique perspective, and something I wish your audience would have access to at some point. I'm not sure how that would be, is to get a look at this, this push and pull, as I mentioned earlier, between the innovation. Ramon is an incredible innovator. For you guys that know him and see him working, it's phenomenal to watch. And so obviously someone in regulation would seek to support that, but a deep understanding brings in a lot of questions from the regulatory perspective, just as he confronts on the technical side. So the push and pull between what this technology is trying to achieve and what is implications from a regulatory perspective. So coming out of that process, just as Ramon comes out of the building process with an increased understanding of how the technology works, what's its potential failure points or attack vectors, in the same way, the same process occurs from the regulatory side as we tumble around with some of these issues, and how the tech might eventually manifest itself in the markets in terms of investment from regulatory side. It's a fascinating process, and the reason I'm involved more than just investing. It's a fascinating process, with the technology that has the potential to impact globally. It's an amazing thing.
Yep. And I think that's what we all need to understand. Like, it's not that straightforward. When we say yes, there are so many DeFi platforms, there is a reason for that, because everybody's trying to move the needle by a little bit, and we need to be open minded about it, I would say. Means I do not think that there are too many, to be frank. Means again, I keep going back to when you said .com boom, and how many websites were launched. Like, everybody wanted to launch an idea. Everything was supposed to be online, and how many of those really succeeded from there? But when they did, they were really big. Like, they are not like means Amazon was born in those .com days, and Google was born in those days. So it's a matter of identifying the right products, and sometimes you have to just diversify. You cannot really bet on the right horse all the time. You cannot consider that the future. So all of these projects, as I said, there definitely may be some who are malicious in nature, but many of them, I would say, which we are watching at least, they are trying to move the needle by a little bit. They are trying to do things differently, and we are hopeful that this will materialize into something. Having said that, we are not saying that every one of them will be successful. And when something fails, if you are not actively watching, or if you're not participating in it, or you're not sophisticated, you will feel the pain, because if you are just a passive investor and you just speculated on it. And that's the difference, I think, and that's where the challenge is, that you should not just you should either take help from professionals or some people who are really watching it, instead of trying to do it yourself. Because this whole trend about, I think, a lot of people, there are a lot of memes, and there are a lot of stuff which people talk about in crypto world, saying do your own research. uh, it's not easy. Don't try to be like, to overestimate yourself. That is one thing I would like to guide people. Like, when we look at it, we have not even looking at 50% projects, because we also know that we cannot investigate everything, and we cannot be smart about everything. So as I keep saying, the way you can build your own portfolio or your own investments is about what you understand. Invest only in something which you understand. Do not try chasing the latest hot thing in DeFi world. And if it's something is for real, it will be available for a long time. I think there's a lot of questions which come our way as a venture fund, saying, is it already too late for Bitcoin? Is it already too late for DeFi? These are the same questions people asked in 2017, or and now we are already making all-time highs, and people are giving now Citibank and JP Morgan and all these people are giving 200,000, 300,000, almost ridiculous targets for Bitcoin. So as long as you understand why you came into this product, and what is the long-term thesis of it, you can always buy at any point. While if you bought at the peak in 2017, you did not make much. So it's never easy. It's never a given formula, which even if you do the research, you cannot you can never not have a financial success as a guarantee. And if so, that's where I think you need to always understand that it's a matter of what is your understanding of these projects. If it's a very common thing in crypto world, wherever people don't understand it, they either call it a scam, or they call it like, just it is not good enough. And I think that's something which what I have seen institutional investors don't do. They diversify into multiple projects. They look into the merit of each of these projects, and that's what we are trying to do as Blockstart Ventures. We are not trying to be tribal. We are not trying to justify one thing over other. Of course, we may have some benefits of knowing some technologies better than others, and this is also we are going to promote. Like, we are going to say, if you are investing directly as yourself, or you are investing through any fund, look for what the strength of like, what is the knowledge base you are going after, whether you understand the products you're investing in. And there will be enough opportunities, and the market is big enough. The finance market is so huge. We talked about it in our previous webinar, that we have probably not even touched the 0.001% of the market size. So there is no need to be worried about that this is the only one product you missed, or whether this is the last opportunity. It's a matter of first understanding and then going after a strategy which will work. And I think that's what we have been doing, and that is what we believe when we look at all these different DeFi projects.
It's interesting to too.
So I think we are going to conclude very soon. So let me take a last few questions, so then we can stop. So it is I see that there was a question about block one is going to the alphabet of blockchain. So I don't understand that. You're talking about
Google.
Yeah, I think this question can mean many things. So let me understand. If yes, they are trying to engage with Google and all these big companies, which is great for EOS, but we have not seen much, in my personal view, from like even Google as a block producer. They have been very passive. They just launched a node, did not do much, but hopefully that will change. But I think the biggest exciting part about block one is the commitment to bring the Bitcoin liquidity onto EOS, which recently Ben Bloomer has talked about. And I think those are the things which are probably going to be much more exciting personally for me to look out for. Given all the tools which are being built in DeFi world of EOS, I hope that once liquidity comes in, probably we will see a very different ecosystem here.
There's a lot of comparisons also between what's happening now and what's happened in the past. And when you talk about the early internet and all the investments in late 90s, 2000s, the difference was that it was dependent on infrastructure and hardware. And why crypto and blockchain is moving so quickly is that we don't have that dependency. It's essentially a software movement. So a lot more rapid innovation and a lot more projects also, because it doesn't require the same amount of investment as perhaps the early internet days did.
Yep. No, I think this is great. So thanks a lot for all who joined live. I think it was an afterthought. We thought we should bring this video on investing with a difference. So thanks a lot for all of you who joined live. We have been doing quite a few webinars and investor education series from Blockstart Ventures. If you want to go watch our previous webinars and also register for the future events live where you can participate and ask questions, go to blockstartventures.com/events. We will post the link in the YouTube description here once this video uploads for future viewing. And please feel free to join us and ask other questions either through the website, or I think most of you know where to catch me on some of our Telegram channels and so on. And thanks a lot for joining.
Thank you, guys.